So, as I mentioned earlier, AEW has basically put a halt to any interviews being done without their consent. Now, with that said though, as I've talked about before, and it's being brought up even more so, is the future of All Elite Wrestling on the Turner networks. Now, everybody has said that we shouldn't have much to worry about because unlike WCW, who was owned by Turner, basically AEW is its own individual entity. So they're kind of, in a situation to where, yeah, they could be put out by the Turner networks, but that probably won't happen till the contract expires. And that's probably true. And the one thing some people, even Alvarez and Meltzer, are talking about, or even alluded to, I should say, is that now is the best time, even though some streaming services are kind of in an influx or transition or not doing so well at all, now is the best time for AEW to try to get a streaming deal. In other words, either create their own service like WWE did with the network, or basically get in contact with somebody to make a deal to where their shows could be seen on a streaming service just in case something happens. Now, some people have alluded to the fact that nothing really will happen because, like I said, AEW's in a situation to where they're their own independent entity, and they're kind of like in a safe zone for the time being. But as I've mentioned before, they might be in a safe zone, but they might be in a situation to where if Kathleen Finch, who is being put in charge of TBS, TNT, True TV, and 40 other networks at Warner Media and the Turner networks and stuff, if she decides, that, hey, wrestling is just not on the table for us, it's not something that we feel is going to really generate the numbers we want or the viewership numbers we want, or it doesn't work work within the parameters of what we want to do, she could say, hey, as a way of, being courteous and everything, she could let their contract expire. She could say, hey, we'll let you stay on TNT, we'll let you stay on TBS until the end of 2023, but then or at least as you get close to that moment in 2023, you have to start negotiating with other networks. And I could see that happening, and I'm not alone in that. That, she could probably, like I say, be courteous enough to say, hey, we just don't see wrestling as part of our agenda or in our parameters of future programming. But hey, as a courtesy to you guys for at least generating some good numbers and stuff, we'll let your contract finish out, but then you got to go look for another network. Maybe even while they're in the process of seeing that contract currently with Turner expire. Now, let me make this perfectly clear about one thing. As I've said before and others have stated, right now it doesn't look like AEW could be, put into that situation. For all we know, she might say, hey, this show's putting on this show and its follow-up show, its spin-off show on TNT, they're generating some great numbers, let's keep them on the air and see what happens in the near future. She might allow them to stay. She might even get behind it, increase the budget, maybe even increase the budget a little bit more with some more money thrown their way to have a bigger production value and stuff, and that would be great. That would be great. But even though she might be willing to do that, as a lot of people pointed out, there might be a catch to it. You see, the catch is, let's say she decides, okay, they're generating enough money, they're generating enough views, they got this demographic that we rarely get on our networks, showing up every Wednesday and Friday night and every Saturday on a quarterly occasion. She might view that as a positive and say, hey, I like that, and that's enough evidence for me to keep the show going. and here's a little bit more money thrown their way to help them, beef up the productions and stuff and maybe get more talent. But she might also, like I say, do it with a catch. And as I was trying to say, the catch some people could look at, and as I mentioned in one video, could have a big fan reaction, and maybe not in the way AEW would hope, is she might say, hey, you could stay on the network, you're giving us some great numbers, we got this demographic and all that. Basically praise them for everything they're doing in a positive light, but then say the only catch to the whole staying on the networks that they have to agree to is removing the blood and the swearing. And for a lot of fans that like AEW for being able to allow their men and women to do this kind of stuff, to bleed, if you will, to swear and everything. For a lot of fans that enjoy AEW for that, along with the in-ring competition, if you will, between the athletes, between the wrestlers, the stars, if the agreement to keep them on, because of everything they're doing for them, number-wise and all that, in a positive, in a positive way, if the catch is, hey, you got to not have this anymore or that anymore, like I said, the reaction by the fans may not be one that AEW or Tony Khan are going to appreciate or are going to be very fond of. And hopefully, if Tony Khan does meet with Kathleen Finch, if not already, he's going to explain, look, if you keep us on here, you got to let us be ourselves. You got to let our stars, you got to let our men and women that compete in this ring to bleed, to swear, to kind of do, like work shoot, style promos and everything, because, that's what's making this show a lot of money. That's what's bringing in the numbers, from a viewership standpoint, in an attendance standpoint. Hopefully he explains that to her, if not already, because, once you take the opportunity to explain to the person that's basically going to be somewhat of your new boss, or somewhat of the person you got to answer to, more so, just as much as the previous person, once you take the opportunity to explain, what your show is about, that's going to be on the network they're now running or overseeing, hopefully when you explain the situation, it's enough for that person to understand and be like, okay, fine, we get it, we'll allow it, but we're going to do this. And for all we know, Kathleen Finch might say, you know what, thank you. She might thank Tony and let things remain as they are, but maybe she'll put on a viewer discretion advised warning saying what you're about to see is, viewer discretion advised, and some of the things are not associated with Warner Discovery or whatever. And that's it. Maybe put on a little bit of a warning before the show comes on, saying that, hey, we may be airing it on our networks, but we are not associated with what you're going to see here. Like, we don't take responsibility for what you're about to see. And she may do that too if Tony Khan takes the opportunity in the future, if not already, to explain to her the how AEW is run. Because here's the thing, and everybody has brought this up. You can have some great numbers, but it doesn't mean that the people that are now running the show, running the show, steering the ship, if you will, are going to want to keep you around. They may look at you and say, yeah, you're doing all this, but as I mentioned earlier, they could say, yeah, but we just don't see you as being part of our future. We don't see you being on our plateau for future programming or the direction we want to go in. And that they may let them go. They may say, after this, you're done. Now, as I mentioned, I don't think Kathleen Finch would be the kind to abruptly take AEW off the air. No. I think she would be the kind that if AEW is not in the cards for Turner anymore, for TNT or TBS, she'll be the kind to let the contract expire, but while they're in the final year of said contract, allow Tony Khan and his crew to negotiate with other networks, maybe streaming services, to get the show to remain on the air in some shape, form, or fashion. She might be that kind of person to do that. She might be. But it's hard to say because, again, AEW, whether you're an anti-AEW person or you're just an overall wrestling fan in general that loves everything pro wrestling, whether you call it pro wrestling or sports entertainment, you have to admit AEW is doing great. It's got a lot of momentum behind it. It really does. But the realization, as I mentioned, is just because it's got a lot of momentum doesn't mean, it's invulnerable. It doesn't mean it's impervious, I should say, to being taken off. I mean, I know it's a strange comparison to make, but let's look at WCW. Yes, they were owned by Turner and everything, but once the AOL merger happened, what did the people at AOL do? I mean, yeah, WCW was hemorrhaging money, but they were bringing in still some decent numbers. Yeah, the hemorrhaging of money didn't help them, but the numbers, the viewerships was still on a positive, high. But did that help them? No. That didn't help them. Because the AOL people basically said, hey, we don't like wrestling. It's not, it's not something we find viable, even if it's making money. Get rid of it. And that's what they did. Let's be honest, even if they weren't hemorrhaging money, WCW, if they were doing the opposite, still probably would have been removed because the new people didn't see them as something that was viable. They didn't. I'm not saying the same thing's going to happen here. But what I think potentially could happen is she'll let the contract, expire. Like she'll let them continue running on TNT and TBS until the current contract expires. But during the duration of the last year of said contract, she's going to probably let them know you got to go and negotiate with somebody else. Because after this contract is done, AEW is no longer going to be on the networks. Now again,
the neck, that's
like I was saying, just in conclusion, it's it's just a matter of speculating and hoping that history doesn't repeat itself. But again, it's just one of those situations to where now, as the merger becomes more complete and more people get assigned, newer people get assigned to areas and stuff. It makes you really wonder exactly what the future holds. I mean, I know a lot of people are hoping AEW stays and gets an extension and all that, and that probably gets more money thrown behind it. But then again, even if they do, who's to say, like I mentioned, Kathleen Finch won't come out and say, hey, you can stay, you're doing this and this and this, and that's great, but you need to cut back on this, you need to cut back on this, or cut it completely. And maybe that's what's going to happen. And like I said, I think if anything, fans are going to react in a way Tony Khan's not going to, really like. I mean, he already gets crapped upon sometimes about some of the decisions he makes because he is still learning how to run a wrestling promotion, as a promoter, if not two at the same time. So he's bound to make mistakes, but he'll still get criticized even by those that support him. But if it comes down to the fact that if they stay, if Kathleen Finch says, hey, you could stay because you're doing this, but you got to remove this, it's not going to sit well because fans come to AEW for that. Not just for the great wrestling and all that, as I've mentioned before, but for the blood, for the swearing, because that's what they miss about it. And if that gets taken out, they're not going to be happy. They'll look at AEW as just being a modern day version of WCW, or just a more wrestling oriented, wrestling focused version of WWE, and that's it. And they're not going to appreciate that. They're not going to like that. So, who knows what the future holds? Basically, we'll just have to see what decisions get made and everything. Again, she may allow them to stay until the contract expires, and during the final year of said contract, suggest them finding a new home because they're not going to be on Turner anymore because it doesn't fit the new agenda or the new direction. But we'll see. We'll see what they do. But let me know what your thoughts are. How do you feel about it? What do you think the future holds for All Elite Wrestling on the Turner Networks, on Warner Media? How do you feel about all this? Comment below, live chat during the premiere, and I'm out.